what we're going to be working on today is the snake on the deer's antler. We'll be working on the colors, the contrast, as well as walking you through the process. Okay, so what I started off with was my black, and I'm just taking it and going along and outlining and defining the edges of the snake and also areas where there's going to be shadow. I'm using the black to help with the shadows as well as defining the outline and the edges of the snake, which the black will eventually get blended in with the other colors of the snake as I add the other colors, and you will see how they will blend in to help add that shadow to the snake in the areas where there is the shadow. And again, just continuing to take that black colored pencil, make sure that it has a sharp point so that you can get a fine line, because you don't want a thick line, you just want a fine line to kind of define those edges so that you can lay down the edges of the snake and then go in there and blend it. When you go to lay down the actual coloring for the snake's skin and the underlying areas, you will have a defined edge to follow along with, as well as to blend in with the other colors to help give it that shadow. Again, just going in and continuing to define those edges. Again, you need to make sure that your pencils have a sharp point so that you get that fine line. You don't want a thick line. And again, make sure you have a piece of paper or something underneath you while you're doing this so that you don't get any of your oils from your hands on the image, as well as lift any color off of the picture. Again, now I'm taking that black pencil and going in and laying down the scales on the snake's body and just putting in some, and you want these to just not be random lines. You want to look at your reference photo and look at the direction that these scales are going in and make sure that they follow the curve. Again, pointing out there that you want to make sure that you have keep that pencil sharp so that you can get those really fine detailed lines in there. And you want those lines to follow the curve of the shape of the snake. You shouldn't just be random lines drawn in there. You want to continually look at that reference photo and look. Now I'm using that lime green, or lime, I believe that's lime green, and I'm just going in there and putting in, you want to start with your lights and work up toward your darks. Because if you try to start with your darks and go to the lights, then you'll have a problem sometimes with the lights not wanting to show up. Again, showing you I'm using a Faber Castell colored pencil sharpener, and it has a side that has a fine point side. It will give you a really fine point on your colored pencils. And just using that to go in and lay down. Now I'm using a dark green after I've sharpened it, and just going in and putting in some more of those darker tones in the areas where his scales were darker, as well as putting in those scales. And switching back to that black colored pencil to go in and put in. And I used the black colored pencil to put in the lines for the scales, because when you zoom in and look at the scales on the snake, you can see that each scale has a little bit of a shadow around it to define it. So that's why you want to use a black or a dark gray to give those scales definition and to bring them in. You don't want them to blend in and make it look smooth. You want those scales to be able to stand out. Again, continuing to just lay those lines in. Again, you can see that they're curving. You want to follow the contour of the snake in the direction that the snake is going in. And looking at my reference photo, trying to decide which direction I need to lay in the new line to lay down the scales on this under part of the snake. Again, trying to follow that curve, but yet make these scales overlap. That's what's going to give you the depth and the realism of it in the piece. Again, using that lime green to go in and put in the areas where the scales are brighter and have some highlight in them. Just putting down that base color of that lime green, and then I will go in with a darker green and then an even darker green to deepen the shadow areas. Again, switching to the darker green color. And again, these colors, they don't have to be exact, so don't worry about if you have the right exact color, just as long as it's close. The main thing is your darks and your lights. You want to control you want to make sure you have your contrast correct. So you want your darks dark and your lights light. So the colors don't really matter. You could have a purple and a yellow snake, just as long as you've got your shadows and your lights and your darks dark as they need to be and your lights as light as they need to be. You need to have those highlights sharp and bright and the shaded areas dark. And you mainly just want your contrast to be correct. You want your darks dark and your lights light. Again, going in and making sure I'm following the contour of the snake's underbelly as he wraps around the antler. Continuing to look at my reference photo and see how those scales are following along the snake. And I just got the reference photo off of Pixabay or anywhere else that you can get free reference photos from, and I just found several different pictures of snakes and used those as references to go by for the coloring and the scales and shape of the contours of the snake with them wrapped around something. You can find some good pictures of snakes wrapped around tree branches. That's what I did. I just found one or two good images of snakes that are all curled up around a branch or curled up in a little bundle on the ground to show me the direction of those scales and those contours. Again, just continuing to try to make sure that these lines are overlapping but yet following the contour of the snake to maintain that scale pattern. And you, again, making sure that you want to continue to make sure that you have that pencil sharp so that you get fine lines. You don't want big thick lines because you want these to kind of blend in to give it the shadow, to give it just a bit of a shadow. And as you can see, I'm showing where I'm starting from the next line, from either the bottom going up to the top of the next line or from the top of the next line down to the bottom of the previous line. That gives it that crisscross pattern, as well as gives it continues that overlap, that curving contour of the snake as it wraps around. Now again, going in with that lime green, putting down the light areas of the snake scales, putting down just that base tone, and again, once I have that base of that light green down, then I go back with my darker green and put in those darker colors. And then once I have the whole snake filled in and blended in, I will go in with my OMS and blend this all out, and then I will go back in again with my colored pencils to redefine some detail as well as bring out the scales again. Again, just continuing to and you don't have to use OMS. There you can see in this one occasionally I will use just the pencil to kind of do a blending effect. You just want to make sure that you're not blending out any of your details or any of the highlights that you need to have in there. Again, putting in those shaded areas and the areas of the snake where their scales were a little bit darker. And this doesn't look quite like it does in person. The angle of the camera is kind of causing the last loop of the tail and the tip of the tail to kind of fade out, but it's basically the shading and the coloring and the contrast and everything is basically the same all the way through this, all the way through the snake, with the same tones and colors and brightness and depth. But due to the angle of the camera, it's kind of washing out the end of the snake. But you can get, as you get closer down towards the head where the camera is a little bit more focused in, you get a better idea as to the darkness. Again, you want to make sure you have those darks dark enough and those lights light enough, because that's what gives you that realism. That's what brings out the detail and gives it that realistic look. And you want to to keep yourself from getting overwhelmed, you just do like I was doing here, where I just started on one small area and then just worked my way down. I didn't try to focus on getting all of the scales or the whole snake done and colored in at the same time. I did it at one section at a time. And you can, if you have a section that's a little bit large and it's kind of overwhelming, you can break that down into even smaller sections. You want to just focus on one area to keep yourself from getting overwhelmed, as well as not getting not getting enough detail in an area, because if you try to focus on too large of an area, it can cause you to get, again, overwhelmed, as well as it can cause you to get to miss out on some of that detail. Again, now going back in with that lime green and filling in that base tone color for the areas that are really light. Using that light, go in on the head and put in the areas around the head. Again, continuing to check that reference photo to make sure I have the right colors in the right area. Going in and putting in that pupil on the snake's eye. Putting in some little highlights in there with that lime green, trying to bring out that eye. Now going back in with those darker greens, and I believe I actually used two different greens here. I used the lime green for the brightness and the highlight of the shiny scales, and then I used a little bit darker green. I'm not sure I think it might have been like a leaf green, and then a forest green to go even darker in areas. Again, you can see I'm just laying down that contrast, bringing in some shadows with those darker greens, some detail down. Bringing in those details, defining some areas with that darker green, putting down some of those shadows on the tree branch, as well as the under part, the areas of the snake that wrap around, because they were shaded. You'll see me go back up towards the top as I'm working along and putting down even more, taking that black and going in and defining the snake's eye and the crease that goes around the top of his eye and out to the tip of his nose. Just redefining some of those details. Bringing in some of that shading again. Putting down some shading underneath. Putting the shading underneath on the antlers where the snake overlaps. Now going in under the bird and putting some shadow underneath him on the antler. Putting some more shading down there. Putting some shading in underneath the butterfly on the other side, on the other antler. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed doing it. And again, here's that finished piece, and I hope you enjoyed going over this with me, and I hope to see you again in the next video.